Alrighty. So thank you all for gathering here today. So this panel, we're going to be talking about reparations and education. My name is Sydney Scott. I am a researcher at the University of Oxford and a reparations scholar. So it is my honor to be convening this panel today. Alrighty. To begin, at the far end, we have Robin Walker, known as the Black History Man. Robin is a longtime educator and disseminator of Black cultural histories. To my left, we have Dr. Wanda Wyporska. She is the CEO of Black Cultural Archives, a heritage center in London, preserving and presenting the diasporic histories of Black people in the UK, which I actually visited for the first time in March. Incredible. Next to her, we have Dr. Gus John, who is an esteemed scholar, education campaigner, lecturer, researcher, and social analyst who's been working in education and movement change for over 50 years. Welcome everybody that is coming in. Please come in and take a seat. No worries that we're getting started. Please come in and take a seat. Next, we have Annabelle Woghiren, who is an anti-racism advocate, a social justice advocate, and a digital activist, where she promotes Black history, Black businesses, and Black culture. And then finally, not quite finally, sorry, I've lost track down here. Dr. Nicola Frith is a senior lecturer at the University of Edinburgh, recipient of Arts and Humanities Research Council grants that she's utilized to produce projects like Mapping Memories of Slavery, Commemoration, Community, and Identity in Contemporary France. And last but not least, Lavinya Stennett is a multi-hyphenate entrepreneur, African studies scholar, poet, filmmaker, and more. Lavinya is the founder and CEO of Black Curriculum, a leading organization bringing Black and African histories into mainstream classrooms in the UK. So can I get a quick round of applause for our panelists? Thank you so much. So we're running a little late on time. So how we're going to do this is we're going to have a bit of a speech from each of our panelists, and then we will open it up for Q&A. But before we get started, and usually I would do this in a more in-depth way, but just can I get a raise of hands, who in here, just so our panelists have the opportunity to know who they're speaking to, who in here views education as their primary sector of interest? Wonderful, wonderful. And is there anybody in here who is curious and coming to learn more? Lovely. Okay, a great mix. Okay, I'm going to turn on the second microphone, and I am going to start all the way down at the other end with Robin Walker. Robin has prepared statements for us, but I just want to introduce this as we try to shorten some of the statements for length of the session. That the questions that I was thinking about as I was reading bios and preparing for this was, can education be a form of reparations? And what are the questions that we still need answered in order to pursue reparations that we can solve through education? Okay, Mr. Walker, please.
What I wanted to address is, how do we see enslaved Africans, and what is their importance to global history? When Dr. Beckford made the documentary The Empire Pays Back, he calculated that at an agricultural wage rate, we descendants of UK enslavement would be owed £4 trillion at 2005 prices. And that's assuming that enslaved Africans were farmers. So I am questioning that. I am challenging that. And why I'm questioning that and challenging that is it true that that's just what enslaved Africans did? Is that what their value was? Now, I have been promoting for the last few years the research of African-American scholar Professor Vincent Taraku Farah, his book Pre-Colonial African Material Culture, where he documents the diversity of skills and technologies brought from Africa to the Americas and the Caribbean by enslaved Africans, including agricultural technologies, horsemanship, cattle rearing, cotton technologies, mining, metallurgy, carpentry, boat building, and navigational skills. And it wasn't just him that said that. We've all heard of Oluda Equiano, right?
Right.
Let's read what he says. I suppose 9/10 of the mechanics throughout the West Indies are Negro slaves. And I well know the coopers, makers of barrels, among them earn $2 a day. The carpenters the same, and oftentimes more, as also the masons, smiths, and fishermen. Mechanics, carpenters, masons, smiths. Did we know this? That's not fault. We didn't know this. We were told it was agricultural labor. And so if you add up the idea that everybody was agricultural labor, multiplied by how many people, the amount of unpaid wages, calculate that at 2005 prices. Yes, indeed, you get 4 trillion. Does that make sense? Well, what would be a carpenter's wage? What would be a mason's wage? What would be a mechanic's wage? So my whole thing then is to change that kind of narrative. So the areas that I want as we re-educate people on what mass enslavement was, I want people to be aware of the agricultural transfers, the various crops that enslaved Africans were able to grow without the use of petrochemical fertilizers and pesticides, and intensified to be able to feed millions of people. I want people to understand the textile transfers. Did you know that a British official in the mid-18th century wrote, the cotton that has been carried from Senegal to Europe has been repeatedly proven to be the finest in the world? Did you know that? Okay, the significance of that is this. What do you think slave traders are going to do with that information? Right, so you can now infer then that mass enslavement wasn't just the capture of people, it was the capture of technology.
Thank you so much, Mr. Walker. I really appreciate that. And look, that was very good. He kept it nice and short. We are going to get to lunch on time. Okay, Lavinya, I'm wondering if you can share with us what it has been like to work in education and to bring Black cultural education into the mainstream in the UK, and if there's a way that we can think about education as a form of reparations.
Okay, good afternoon. So my name is Lavinya Stennett, and I'm the founder CEO of the Black Curriculum, and also an author. Black Curriculum to date has reached over 15,000 teachers and students combined. We work across the country and also Wales. About a month and a half ago, we brought together over 200 educators on the same day as the fastest protests to really look at anti-racist strategies. So our work really is about empowering educators to empower the students. And we also work directly with students. So over the last 6 years, our work has been really about giving young people the tools, working with them as well to really think about the narratives that need to be included in the education system, whilst we also campaign for policy change. So as you know that this is the year of the curriculum review, we actually are expecting the report to drop, I think, next week. And the idea of that is that since 2014, Michael Gove, who changed the last curriculum, this is going to be another review to go forward to think about what the new curriculum could look like. So we've been campaigning for an anti-racist approach, but also an approach that really honours the humanity. And as Robin alluded to, there's a lot of the humanity that's missed out when we think about the narratives. I don't want to repeat them because you've all experienced it, but we know that for sure when we're thinking about the teaching of African histories and people of African descent in this country, there needs to be a more humanising effort. So when I think about education as a form of reparation, for me it starts there because it is about challenging the misconceptions and the deliberate miseducation that has happened. So without education, there is no reparations. In fact, reparations is an act of remembering. And when I think about our ancestors, and as you said as well, a lot of my work in academia has been around Maroons and their relationship to the land. So looking at it from an ecological point of view, because as you said, there were skills, there was a type of relationship with the land that I think our history has ignored, and we only kind of solely focus on the narratives that suit the context of labour and supporting the British economy to flourish. And we think about narratives like Windrush again, it's kind of propagating this idea that our existence can only be acknowledged when it's supporting empire, when it's supporting, Britain to be seen as a strong force. So I think about education coming from a place of remembering not only the skills, not only the wisdom, but also the resistance that we have had for not only in this country, but also for a number of centuries across the Caribbean and across Africa. So I don't see us as separate. I think that's a really good thing to remember in this. I'll come back to this later about how our education approaches really need to be tied together and not just focus solely on the past as a isolated incidents that have happened. So, for example, enslavement in the Caribbean or enslavement in Jamaica, and looking at sugar plantations, but actually understanding how resistance movements from Jamaica have, not only Jamaica, but also Barbados, etc., have all been tied together through the lens of Pan-Africanism. And for me, that's really key. So the second thing I want to approach is this recent idea that it's not about money. And I'm seeing this too often, that the narrative, because we're so focused on reparation being a point of education and a point of understanding the full value of our ancestors, it's not solely about money. It is. And hello.
Correct.
Thank you. It is because the systems that we're living in, the currency that is operated in right now is money. We don't have another system or another currency that exists in this moment that is held to such a high standard. And so for us to really reclaim our narratives and for us to really reclaim the injustices that happened in the past, we actually do need to understand in context of the currency and how broad and how deep and how just callous the brutality was. Money gives us an understanding of how broad this is, and to rebuild exactly. And so I think when we're also thinking about the connection of the currencies that we're educating in, because many students don't know, it's not just about facts and figures, it's about translating those that kind of figure of currency into current day things that they can understand. So when we're linking our reparations education to the past, we also need to talk about the present. It's about coloniality. We talk about colonialism as if it happened. It's continuing through the systems, it's continuing through the structures, it's continuing through modern day presidents and people, especially in the Caribbean, that we often, hold to a high standard, but their power and the perspectives that they have are still wielded within the coloniality that we need to break down. So that comes into my point around when we're looking at situations that are happening right now from Congo with the mining. We also have Barbados last year, the Jack's Hall. That situation was only pushed to the forefront because people pushed it to the forefront. I think if it was going to happen, it would have happened without the pushback. Also, we're thinking about Jamaica. There's beaches, again, that whole thing of I think it's 0.2% of beaches are currently accessible to present-day Jamaicans. But for me, it's also about poverty because we're experiencing high levels of destruction to our lands, destructions to our education systems, not only here in the UK, but also in the Caribbean and Africa. And all these things need to be linked when we're talking about reparative education, reparative justice. And so therefore, I think what that does is take our minds off of what the government can do and pushing it back onto the corporates that are controlling the narratives and controlling the spaces. And I think therefore it allows us to mobilize better. So when I think about the frameworks that we use, I look back to the anti-apartheid movements that was driven mainly by students in the 1960s, where there was a lot of teachings. A lot of people say, okay, you should, help the police, maybe the police force become better. I don't think training is going to help. I think we need to take new approaches to really look at some of the privatized systems that are withholding reparations from happening. And it's not just like a government-led thing. I think we can take ownership of that if we take ownership of the history that connected these things together. And last but not least, language justice is a part of this as well. Also, she's not in the room, but Ife Dion, that's her Instagram name, sorry. But my friend Ife, she's also a barrister, but she works a lot on Black British English being recognised as a language. And I think about also Jamaican patois, or just Jamaican being recognised as a formal thing. We're thinking about education system. Why is it that our languages are still seen to be hinged on British, i.e. broken English? These are forms of expression and dialects and languages that are ours. And I think it starts with a reclamation of just these small things that will make a big difference. So I've gone all over the place, but I hope that I'm actually setting the context as to what educational reparations can start looking like if we join these things together and maybe take away the waiting that we're giving to the government and waiting for them to do things, because we have the power right now.
How many people have now heard something that they did not, in the past two speakers heard something that they did not know about before we got to this session? I just want to take a quick second to see if Professor Andrews is here and perhaps slipped in through the back. No. Okay, no worries. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, Dr. Frith, I'm going to let you take it away, and I have a little piece of paper for my panelists over here just to keep. Okay. You were good. You were right on time, but just to keep our time to check. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm here, or I've been invited on this occasion to talk about the work that we did for the University of Edinburgh for Decolonised Transformation Project, as it was called. I think just reflecting on the question that you just asked there, about questions that still need to be answered and how education can, or maybe in this case, the higher education sector has a long way to go. And, you know, one of the things I was thinking about when I was reflecting on the work we've done is this question, which is the extent to which universities can actually truly decolonise, or whether they're just performing the gestures of decolonisation while keeping their hierarchies intact. Because having worked on this, having been invited to do this work a number of years ago, and then we did an awful lot of work centering absolutely reparations and reparative justice. Sister Esther was there with us right from the beginning. She helped shape everything, as did many other reparationists, communities of reparative justice interest. We had the historical work that was done. I won't go through that. You can look at you can look at the report. You can look at the kind of summary of what we found within our institution. I think there are a few things that are worth noting in terms of what we found historically. First of all, from the limited time that we were given to do this work, the endowments or the gifts that are not just historical, and this is where the past, present money is concerned, they're still active today. So there are still endowments that are still giving out money to be used for chairs, for all sorts of different things to support the university. So a simple form of reparation in terms of the university, and one of our requests that came from communities was, use that money to do something reparatory. It's really important. Other things that we found, which was where our report perhaps slightly different from many other reports that you'll all know about in higher education institutions, was the focus on the way that knowledge perpetuates racism in Edinburgh, was right at the heart of the Enlightenment's links to racializing discourses and pseudosciences. The Scottish Enlightenment is not just about coexisting with racism, it actively authored it. Education was an arm for colonisation, was an arm for enslavement. So I think that's something that's really important in reports. But then, we also wanted to think about how the past doesn't just remain in the past, it links to the present and the structures of the university. So we looked at that from both statistical and then, qualitative perspectives in terms of the experiences of racism, identifying the acute lack of racial literacy among students and staff within the institution. We also identify the fact that Black students and staff in particular have remained very stable in terms of their numbers. They haven't increased in line with other diversity measures at all. And in fact, if we look at Black and African staff members, they remain at less than 1%. Such a small amount that we had to have a debate whether we were even allowed to include that in our final report, which is also quite interesting. We worked directly in shaping all of this research and our community engagement with communities of reparative justice interest. We thought that was so important to do right from the beginning. And they identified 4 areas that they wanted the community engagement work to focus on: restitution and the repatriation or rematriation of ancestral remains and looted heritage, the development of a research community centre, so research and community, not separating the two, for the study of racism, colonialism and anti-Black violence that is co-governed with communities. Curriculum transformation by embedding African and Indigenous epistemologies across the curriculum and across disciplines. And then the importance of digital archiving and opening up access to communities, and also providing a service for communities to digitise their own movement building. So we used all of our events, our workshops, to create a list of reparatory justice recommendations. Again, you can see it, but it's things like public apology, measurable change, establishing a centre, transforming recruitment and retention, curriculum reform, opening the archives, and divesting from the ongoing harms that the university continues to invest in, because as Sister Esther speaks about the Mangamizi, it still continues in our institution today in terms of what we're actually investing in. So one of the questions that I asked at the beginning, like, can universities truly decolonise? It means we need to share the power. We're at a really sticky moment where we've handed over all of our work to the institution. And it's here that the problems are beginning to show, because the institution doesn't get what reparations are. And there's no one sitting at the decision-making table now who understands what reparations are or who has any expertise in that area. So we are kind of in a bit of a battle at the moment to try and adjust that, because if we start with a reparatory ethos, it doesn't then end when our project ends. And I think this is the problem with a lot of the projects that we see. I think Scott Ainsley was saying about, what is going on with all these other projects that have said we'll pay reparations or we'll look at reparations. It's the succession planning after the historical piece has been done. It's absent. So, I just had a little quote from Paulo Freire that says, washing one's hands of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless means to side with the powerful, not to be neutral. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. For the panelists, I want to read a comment, something that one of the people online has said. Education is preparation for reparations.
Yeah.
So with that, Annabelle, can you share with us what your education journey has looked like and how that relates to reparations?
Of course. Hi everyone, I'm Annabelle and I'm an anti-racism and social justice educator who operates across digital, educational, political and legal spaces. And today what I want to talk about is not necessarily the education system, but the act of education, which expands beyond the physical classroom. Now, I use digital platforms across social media to mobilize over 250,000 people to understand the systems that shape their lives and take action and get informed, and most importantly, getting involved as well. And through that work, one thing has become painfully clear: that foundational knowledge is missing. And this is not a symptom of a lack of education, but it's a sign of a system which is designed to keep people separate and to keep knowledge unattainable. I speak online about colonialism, about police brutality, about the genocides across the Congo, across Sudan, across Haiti. And beyond the questions that I receive from my community, who are elegant, who are intelligent, engaged, and hungry to learn, but it also reveals how deeply our education system has failed to teach the truth. But it also shows us what's possible, that when people begin to relearn their history, they begin to reclaim their power. And this is because when we talk about reparations, yes, we're talking about money, but we're also talking about repairing knowledge, repairing our memory, and repairing our imagination. Now, my work in the digital space began online, and it turned into a digital classroom which now reaches hundreds and thousands of people daily. When I first started breaking down complex issues, my intention was simple, and that was to make knowledge accessible. But what I quickly discovered was something deeper, and this was a hunger for history, because I was in shock about how little people had been taught. I received comments like, "I never learned this in school," and this floods my posts daily. Now, to the extent of this is not just a coincidence, but this is a sign of neglect. Now, education as the practice of freedom, it must begin with the truth. It must begin with honesty. And what this reveals is that the foundational knowledge which is required for justice, knowledge about empire, about enslavement, but also about resistance, is missing. Now, despite the current climate that we exist in today, something powerful is happening online, and this is why I'm here to tell you that today. Our methods of learning are becoming more expansive. For example, social media, the digital realm, has opened up a site for intellectual production. It has become an unexpected classroom. People are using TikTok, Instagram, YouTube to unlearn, to relearn, and to reimagine. Knowledge is being democratized. It's becoming accessible. It's becoming shared. And most importantly, it's becoming collective. And every day I see people who are invested in causes, campaigns, and a history to which the traditional system had taught them is so far removed from their own. And this is from my first-hand experience that I believe that education is a form of reparative education, where communities are taking ownership of truth-telling, where the formal system has failed us. And given the context, this is huge. We have thinkers like Fanon who remind us that to speak a language is to assume a culture and to carry the weight of a civilization. And we know that colonialism used language to control thought because European languages became the medium of legitimacy, and while African languages carried lived knowledge. And as a byproduct of this, the colonial education was designed not to serve African societies, but to reproduce hierarchy and dependency. Now, together, they reveal how education traditionally serves power, and why reclaiming it is essential for its justice. So what happens when we use education as a form of reparative justice? We reconnect with history. We begin to see patterns in our lives, in our laws, in our institutions, and in inequalities today. And fundamentally, this is because reparative justice means rebuilding connection, where a colonial system that maintains itself on our individualization. And we do that through an education of the interconnectedness of everything. Now, relearning the past becomes the first act of rewriting the future. And when education is democratized, we begin to shift the narrative. But digital advocacy shouldn't have to fill the gap left by the system and by the colonial powers. And if we are serious about education as reparative justice, we must embed critical and honest teachings of colonial history, not just in our curriculum, but in our everyday lives. We need to reimagine education as a practice of equality, not elitism. And we need to equip the future generations to think critically about power, about history, and most importantly, about humanity. Relearning the past isn't about guilt, but it's about accountability and transformation. Rewriting the future means creating a system which tells the full story, not just in the classroom or not just in academia, but in every single thing that we do, from our laws to our institutions to our systems. And it is about creating one that dignifies every single one of us and prepares the next generation to build a more just world. And in that sense, education itself as an act, as a muscle, as a collective form of reparative justice becomes reparation. Education is a collective act of truth-telling, of healing, and of hope. Thank you so much.
Annabelle, thank you so much. I heard a lot in that about systems and about structures. And so I want to point to this comment as well about, I hope the work of the International Network of Scholars and Activists on African Reparations will be mentioned. I was first introduced to NSR when they asked if I would publish my research with them. And it's really fascinating to me because they are encouraging and patroning young scholars who are pursuing radical education to not only pursue that education, but to house it and to archive it outside of these predominantly white institutions that have always been the gatekeepers of the knowledge that we produce ourselves. So I believe there may be some more speakers on the panel who will be able to speak more to NSR, but I just wanted to bring that up as well as something that if you all are curious, you should definitely look into further. Okay. Up next, please, Professor Gus Strong. Let's take it.
I'm going to stand, or else I might fall asleep on you. It's good to be here. I want to share some stuff which connects pretty much with what we heard downstairs and what some of my colleagues have already shared. Just a couple of things. You mentioned INOSA. I am privileged to be the current chair of INOSA, and I want to pay tribute to Nicola here for the work that she and my colleagues on the network have done over the years to bring some clarity to the role of education in the reparations movement, and particularly the responsibility that...
Professor, you need to use the mic. People can't hear you.
Oh, I hate these damn things. Especially the responsibility that scholars have to ensure that we struggle for epistemic justice. And by epistemic justice, I mean acknowledging the fact that we, particularly as African people, wherever we may have come from, have been subjected to the hegemony of Western epistemology throughout our lives. And that is what our education systems are actually built around. I just want to reference two other things. One, that in 1966, while a student in that place, I started the first Black supplementary school in the city of Oxford. In 1989, I became the first Black director of education in Britain. There have not been many like me since. And what I want to share in terms of my experience, the experience I gained from all of that, I see myself, some people call me an academic, that's debatable. I see myself as a social analyst, yeah? And what I want to say is this, that the major problem we have in this country and in our relationship with Britain as formerly colonized people is that there is a curse that abides in this nation. It is a curse that has its origins in the barbarism that fueled the British Empire. And as others have said, we're not dealing just with the past, we're dealing with the fact that that racism has been so etched into the DNA of this nation that it remains with us forever and a day. Now, that helps me to understand my state of being in the world in Britain. It helps me to understand the experiences that we have as Black people in this place. It helps me to understand the depth of the betrayal of generations of people, residents of this nation, not only we as Black people coming from the colonies, but particularly white Britain itself. So when we start talking about reparations, we have to understand that the whole project that Britain saw itself as undertaking, particularly after the Second World War, when we started coming here in significant numbers, was about getting us to adjust, to integrate, to adopt their systems as aliens, as strangers, as if that project had nothing at all to do with themselves. In other words, the assumption was that Britain was okay until we started coming here and contaminating stuff. Which is why when I worked for the Runnymede Trust in Handsworth in the late 1960s and produced that little book, Race in the Inner City, one of the things I was describing in there is how the whole municipality, Birmingham City Council, and all its institutions, and indeed around the country, people were seeing us as Black people as being the cause of the decay and the squalor that characterized those industrial centers of Britain. So what is my problem? My problem is that we have been trying as African people to gain our education rights, to make sure that the schooling system didn't betray us, deny us opportunities. Because we knew from our past experience that although our parents, my parents were illiterate peasant farmers, although most of our communities had a poverty of means, and I grew up in dire poverty, we did not have a poverty of aspiration. And even the lowest of us believed that education was a route to social mobility. Paulo Freire said it. Education does not change society. Education changes people. People change society. Now, if we accept that, then we've got to ask ourselves, how could it be possible that a state like Britain, the British Empire, could continue along educating its people as if it was not a class-ridden society, as if the schooling system didn't stratify who would do what and when and why. If you were going down in the tin mills and the coal mine, tin mines and coal mines, you didn't need very much education. So the whole thing was totally stratified. And rather than pointing up that it is those elites who use the wealth that our ancestors created to structure the society and its economy that were causing them problems as white working class people, child labor, those satanic mills, all of that kind of stuff. Rather than dealing with that reality, they manipulated the racism that runs through the system and that the white working class particularly saw as their weapon to keep us out, rather than asking fundamental questions about how it is that Britain became rich. Why was it associated with us at all? Why did we have the right, with our blue passports, to come to this country? And how does that relate to them and their own need of repair? Because my view is this, my friends, unless Britain accepts and commits itself to self-repair because of colonialism and imperialism and the barbarism that fueled it all, we don't stand a cat and hell's chance. My dear friend, our friend, the noble Lord Simon Bully, and please don't hold his surname against him, the noble Lord Simon Woolley celebrates the fact that because of Operation Black Vote, rather than having the four, Abbott, Vaz, Grant, and the other fellow, Boateng, we now have 90. And as far as he's concerned, that's a tremendous achievement for Operation Black Vote. But the fact of the matter is, how do those 90 people situate themselves in relation to the nation state? Who would have thought that we would come to a point where it would be legitimate to say to the not so pretty Patel and to Cruella Braverman that you can come back and join Auntie Kemi because all is forgiven. Who would have thought? So we now have Shabana Mahmood churning out all kinds of far-right rubbish and putting us all in danger. We have the curriculum review that's going to be reporting quite soon, talking about the review of the national curriculum and assessment and so on. Race is not mentioned once. And yet, in 1986, September, a young boy, Ahmed Iqbal Ola, was murdered at his school in Birmingham in South Manchester by a schoolmate of his age, 13 going on 14. A racist murder. Darren Colburn, a white working class boy, totally confused and messed up and what have you. Ian MacDonald QC, now late, asked me and two other people, Reena Vavnani and Lily Khan, to join him to investigate that murder with a commission from Manchester City Council. We took evidence. It was one of the most grueling periods of my whole life. We took evidence for weeks from everybody. And as some of you will know, we produced that book called Murder in the Playground, Racism and Racial Violence in Manchester Schools. Simultaneously, the government was consulting on the Education Reform Act of 1988. Kenneth Baker was the Home Secretary. MacDonald wrote to Baker. He went to see the man, pleaded that our findings, very disturbing findings in relation to that murder, should be used in constructing the Education Reform Act because it gave the government the opportunity to articulate once and for all what the role of schooling and education was in combating racism.
Elder John, I apologize.
I will shut up in 2 minutes. One minute. Kenneth Baker basically told us to go to hell. Okay. None of the work that we did featured in the Education Reform Act and in the construction of the national curriculum. Nowadays, we find 10 and 12 and 13-year-old white kids murdering people like Mr. Coley in Braunston in Leicester. Endless racist incidents, particularly after the far right have lifted its head and are being legitimized to the extent that we have far right members of parliament in the Reform Party. And so here we are trying to determine what all of that should mean for the children of enslaved Africans who know no other home than Britain and will continue to know no other home than Britain. So fundamentally what I'm saying is we need to connect, as some speakers were saying downstairs, we need to connect our project with the African Union's 6th Region project and ensure that our children, we have a responsibility to make sure that our children born in this country know what Pan-Africanism is, why they should commit to it and understand it, and use it as a compass to navigate their way in this green and not so pleasant land.
Someone had to follow Gus, and it was a minute. I was born unlucky. Thank you. It's a great privilege. It's a great privilege to sit here with me. I am a late addition to this because 3 weeks ago I became director of the Black Cultural Archive. I'm glad you clapped. I wasn't sure. There's been issues, hasn't there? Let's be honest. Anyway, I'm here to make a new start. I'm honest, if nothing else. We have, very much like the work that Lavinya does. The best thing about my starting was the kids coming in and being really enthusiastic about our exhibits, being enthusiastic about our programs. And we have programs for primary school, university, and secondary schools. And I would invite you to come to BCA as well. We're celebrating our 45th anniversary next year, so I've got a lot of work to do to start organising events and things like that. I'm really looking forward to it. I did a doctorate at Oxford, obviously, many moons before you did. I did not in history. I had one lecturer who was a person of colour. I was not studying classics or anything more rarefied. I was studying history. And I think also we have to think about why so many Black people with doctorates are not working in universities, are not finding their place in academia. There are probably more of us outside than there are in.
Sure.
I want to come back to the money issue because I think money is at the heart of reparations. But everything we've heard, everything we know from our lives tells us that it's about the systemic issue. It's about global capitalism. I'm not saying we don't need the money, we clearly do, but we have to fix the housing, the education, the whole system that enables us to be at the bottom and kept at the bottom. They may not call it slavery these days, but we are still at the bottom. We may be paid, but we are still in 0 hours contracts, in poor paying jobs, and in jobs and in the labour market, in jobs that are far lower than our capabilities, our qualifications, and our talents and skills. So you can call something a different thing. It's about global capitalism, as we know. But I want to bring us away from that big, big picture, and I want to bring us down to us, to everybody in this room. I'm a social historian because I'm nosy. I just like to find out about people and what they're doing and what's happened to them. And this is why I'm going to talk about reparative family history, genealogy. I prefer to call it family history because it's about our families, it's about us. So I am able to trace my family on my mother's side in Devon up to about 1500. They didn't move much. Devon's a bit like that, just stay there. It's not much reason to move. And actually back to Quaker families, to the Fries. The other part of my heritage is Poland. And despite the fact that everybody and their dog invaded Poland, even the Swedes, if you didn't know that, the Swedes invaded Poland at some point. Even despite that, and the wars and the loss of records, I can trace my family back to about 1750, maybe back further, I just haven't had the time. When I look at Barbados, I'm not getting back to 1500. I'm not even getting back to 1750. I have been able to trace some of my family back to about 1844, and that's a wedding, which means that they were alive at the time of so-called emancipation. And this is what has been stolen from us, our history. The ability to find ourselves in the records, the ability to reconstruct our family histories in terms of health. If we know the causes of death of lots of people in our family, then we can start to use that information as well. There is so much within our family history that tells us about ourselves, that roots us as diaspora back in our homelands. My father came to this country in the 60s. I've been to Barbados once, I've met my grandfather, but I don't have that connection. And through doing my family history, I have found that connection, and it's reconnected me with my family. And if we think about so many of our young people who feel disconnected, who don't feel a connection to even the issues that we're talking about now, if we can bring family history back to them and we can give them that pride in their ancestry, in knowing who they are. My African friends I'm really jealous of, because with their oral history, they can sit down and they can recite, a bit like the Bible when it's Jesse, son of John, son of whatever, and they can go back and do that. And I sort of sit there and I'm crying inside because I think I would love to be able to do that. But that is how important this is. When we think about Black History Month, we're really working from a deficit. We are fighting to say, these are our heroes. These are the well-known people. And it's the same people every year, isn't it? Come on, people. We've got to get, I'm not saying we have to get away from Mary C. Cole, that's a really bad way of phrasing it, but we have got to have more. We have got to have the roots and the depth of our history. And we've got to think about our own history as part of that. If we don't know who those people are, how are we going to find who our people are? And the problem is that in order to find who our people are, we have to go to documents like inventories of plantation estates. We have to go to bills of sale of our ancestors. We have to go to the slave registers. And they don't give you tissues at the National Archives. When we look at the slave registers, we can see occupations there. So we can see that somebody was, a night watchman, as one of my ancestors was, or that they were a smith. I found one entry that was a woman and it just said drudge. And there's something about looking at those slave registers and honouring those people. I don't know who most of those people were, obviously, but there's something about reading their names, taking that time, looking at them and just honouring them. So I urge all of you to try and take a look at some of these records. So for me, this is about our health, our history, our pride in ourselves, our connections, and about fighting against that absolute colonial way of taking us away from our history, taking us away from our ancestors, taking our names away. It's about reclaiming our history in a very literal sense. And we can do it because we have the slave registers, we have births and deaths and marriages of lots of Caribbean islands. And I guess what I would say to you is that the irony of roots, I watched that when I was really young and I had nightmares. I mean, I don't know why there was a television anywhere near me at that point, but the point of Roots was that it engaged a whole generation of people in family history. But it was mainly white people. And we have to use this. We have to know that we can trace our roots. I'm not promising everybody in this room that you'll be able to trace your family back, but we have to at least try and start rebuilding that. And that in itself is a form of reparations. When I look at the slave registers for Barbados, I see Collingwood, I see Rollock, I see the names of people that I know, the descendants. I also see in the compensation records, because you can access those as well, I see Drax, I see Tyrwhitt. They make the shirts, you see the adverts on, and there's a reparational act there in looking through those and seeing, okay, where has that money gone? I want to end, because my time is up, I want to end by saying that this is a journey that is very, very difficult emotionally. I was looking through some records and I found a relative who was potentially a freed slave who owned slaves. Now that is complicated, and that is complicated in terms of reparations. We know that if we've come from that part of the world, we did not escape untouched. We are not just Black. My ancestors were alive in Christchurch, in Fairy Valley. I know the plantation they were on. They were there for Busser's Rebellion. But I also know who owned them. So if I can trace my ancestors back to the plantation and to the compensation records, I can trace those owners back down too. And that is a very personal element of reparations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was incredibly powerful. Can I get one more round of applause for all of you? Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here today. Mr. Graham, for your experience and your wisdom with us. It is invaluable. We have just 5 minutes until lunch. So I want to see in the audience if we have any questions that we can do really quickly. And I do also want to check online to see if we have any questions, because people that are in person might have the chance to speak to the panelists in person and catch them on the way to lunch. So quick scan of the room. I see one in the back. I see two. Is this a question right here in green? Yep. Yeah, okay. I didn't know if you were trying to leave. Anything online? I'm just going to check online. Okay. Nothing online. Please start.
As a reparations activist, educating, you'll need the mic for people online.
I come to the front as well, so they can hear me and see my T-shirt. Right. Thank you so much to the great ancestor Bernie Grant, who spearheaded the reparations movement here in London, UK, and globally in Europe, who I was educated by. The question I'd like to ask, because it was interesting to learn about the international network of scholars and activists on African reparations. I really think it's important we have safe Black spaces, and I think it's important that we have all Black representatives from the grassroots. It's been talked a lot about today from the main hall in particular, it's about returning this campaign as much to the grassroots as it is to civic society, whatever that means. So is there going to be a serious opportunity? And thank you so much for your presentation and the importance of economic reparatory justice, because you can't build nothing without economic reparations. Can we see a concerted effort to have an all-Black, independent, international network of scholars here in Black Britain? Because I don't feel safe speaking to people that are not of my heritage. I just don't feel safe. And I think there's a lot of people that also do not want to come into spaces where they see people that don't look like them, that weren't on the front line when we were fighting for this in the time of Bernie Grant and up to the present day. Thank you.
Thank you. And Blue, did you have a question as well? Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, more of a statement. It was probably a question. I'm here on 2 levels. I'm an educator working further education, and I'm also a trade union activist for an education union. One of the things that I think we miss out when we talk about education, we talk about schools, we talk about universities. We're missing further education out here. Now, I work in further education. I know for a fact they are not addressing the issues that we need to address. We are doing these things individually. So I'd really like to have a conversation going forward, about how we include and make sure, because these are the people in the community who have influence. And if we can't get to them, we're going to have bigger problems. So I just want to make sure that we're talking about education, we also include further education in that, and also the responsibilities we have. Myself, a trade union activist, I'm an ex-president, we passed a motion on reparations, the conversations we have about responsibilities of trade unions as well.
Thank you so much for that contribution. I have one more question. Panelists, please be thinking about who would like to volunteer to answer some of these, because I won't be able to take all of you.
Thank you. I'm going to give you some examples of where you can actually do some reparative work that costs no money. I went to school in this country and learned about William Puffy as an active socialist. I was impressed by the idea of the Chartist. Nobody ever told me he was African. Yeah, that costs no money to teach that. I am really struggling with terms that are being used, which can be changed at no cost. We were not owned. You cannot own a human being.
Yes.
Some of us were enslaved.
Yes. Take that.
Yeah? There are terms that could be changed at no cost. Please, what is being done about those things?
Absolutely.
Well, we have some questions about our language sovereignty as well. Okay, for my panelists, yep.
So I'm going to speak about trade unions because I worked at the TUC, I worked at the NEU, blah, 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 you know. That is incredibly important, and I'm surprised that you talked about FE without using the term Cinderella, because it's always been the term used. I think education is not just about university and school. Education is here. Education is, you know, the work that you're doing. It is every day. It's the things that we listen to. It's the people that we talk to. I'm particularly focused. I had a lot of experience working at Unionland, which was the trade unions educating in the workplace, in bus garages, in food factories, all around the place. And I think one of the key things that we're lacking in this day and age now is political education. Because if we don't have political education and people don't understand the roots of the problem and the foundation, again, we're coming back to the foundation. So absolutely supporting and looking for ways for BCA in particular to work with trade unions, work with their education arms, and work with teachers. It's Black History Month. You know, I'm sure Lavinya, just as I have, you know, 10 minutes before 9 o'clock. Oh, it's Black History Month. What can we do? You know, can you come to our school in 10 minutes time, literally? You know, it's not acceptable, which is why it should be all year round, but absolutely key part of reaching working people.
Yep, Lavinya, go ahead. And this is going to be the last comment on our official time, but if any panelists are willing to stay behind and anybody wants to stay behind, I can keep entertaining some questions, but go ahead, Lavinya.
I'll try to address the point from the lady who was at Saturn Sugar, so I didn't get your name, Tisha, and your question as well. So when it comes to FE, generally there's no funding, and in order to sustain this work, it needs something. And then to your point, which was around like an international place of like Black solidarity where we can learn, I think in order to do that, we need sustenance. And I'm looking at those 2 points by saying that the grant sector is something that has not been addressed at all in this conversation around reparations. And they having worked in the space for the last 6 years, they are very elusive in terms of how they give funding and what's seen as risk and what the criteria is. And I think if we are really about mobilizing in this space, we can all come together to push for a reparative framework that all grant institutions, those on the boards, have to commit to, that allows archives and research for Black communities, healing space and land, and more than just 1 year of funding. 1 year of funding is not going to do anything, neither is 3. It needs to be minimum 10 so that we can actually start to address the long living legacy. So I think there needs to be some kind of collective push towards the grant sector and getting them to be accountable, because a lot of their money, we know where it comes from. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say in order to address, but I think we should talk as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
And Kelly's point.
Will you pass the mic to Gus, please?
Just very quickly, I want to address your question about INUSAR and Black spaces. Okay. 2 things about that. One, historical anecdote. When we started in the late 1960s with the Caribbean Education and Community Workers Association, there were a handful of Black teachers in London. Bernard Cord was one of them. And at our meetings, we depended upon progressive, humanistic, white teachers who were in the schooling system and were really quite disgusted with the way in which their schools were treating Black kids. They documented that and provided us with the information on the basis of which we began to mobilize on the question of ESN and children being shunted into those kinds of schools. I have no doubt whatsoever that those white teachers were as committed to delivering the education rights of Black children and ending the harm, ending the repetition of barbarism against them than any other teacher would have been. There weren't any other Black teachers around. Roll forward now. I have been in the higher education sector in this country since my first lecturing job at Bradford University in 1977. All right. The number of Black academics teaching within, and I mean there are those in this room who could attest to that, teaching within any discipline, law, humanities, science, whatever it is, in these universities, even now, is pretty abysmal. Okay? So if anybody was to say to me, there is no basis on which you could engage with white teachers about their experiences, about their struggles within those institutions to deliver racial equity, and you can only have those discussions in safe Black spaces, I would say that you're getting one thing wrong. It need not be either one or the other. There's no reason why we can't deal with both. And we need to deal with both, or else we're disadvantaging ourselves.
Thank you, everybody. It is now time for lunch. Thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm grateful for all of your thoughtful presence and questions. Have a great rest of the afternoon.